Part of the basis of the 3Ds are stereotypes. Simply put, stereotypes are an overgeneralization about an entire group of people. What led to the stereotype might have been based in reality at one point. For example, there might have been a person who did the very thing the stereotype asserts, but then that action is taken as truth for every person who is a member of that group and applied to the whole group universally without their input or often their agreement. And the thing is, gut reactions and stereotypes come from the world around us, and what gets stuck in our heads isn't stuff we choose to be there, it's merely the ideas that get repeated the most often. That's what gets stuck. Which is why we can even have stereotypes about ourselves. For example, how many women know that it is ridiculous to assume that all women can and should be a size 2 and physically fit? Yet, how many of those same women who know this begin self-deprecating behaviors when they don't fit that stereotype?
So having these stereotypes in our heads about ourselves and others leads us to underscore the 3Ds. Conversely, being mindful about stereotypes promotes equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging by not determining who a person is or how they will behave based on an overgeneralization about the group we perceive they belong to. It allows people to write their own narratives about who they are, what they do, what they believe, how they act, and so much more, which often leaves people feeling like who they are matters. And let's be clear, knowing stereotypes and having them in our heads does not make us bad people. It's part of the human experience. However, we do have a choice, an opportunity to monitor how those stereotypes affect how we understand and treat others and ourselves.
It's important to remember that we don't get to choose what ideas are in our heads. We don't get to extricate ourselves from the ideas getting into our heads. It's not possible. This is how we learn prejudiced ideas, even when we don't want to. Stereotypes come from the world around us, and because they come from the world around us, we may not even want them in our heads, but they may end up there anyway. We call the effects of this unintentional bias. Unintentional bias is not our fault, and no matter how much we might not want it to be true, we all have biases, and those biases shape our perception. It affects how we perceive others and how we perceive ourselves. Biases are an example of our lens, the metaphoric glasses we use to see the world through. For example, if we saw a baby dressed in blue, we might automatically and unintentionally think the baby was a boy and say, "Your son is adorable," to the baby's caregiver. Here, this would be our bias about which colors indicate what gender a child is. Our lens is shaped by that bias, so we see the blue and think almost immediately that they must be a boy. Recognizing that we have bias and being mindful about how unintentional bias promotes stereotypes and the 3Ds are essential to building equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. When we can pause and question what we perceive before we respond, we can actually prevent ourselves from harming others unintentionally.